his hoop of candles down, all unkindled as they were. "Ho, as if I had not attained to the handling of a gun yet! My hands are cold coming over the moors, else would I go bail to point the mouth at you for an hour, sir, and no cause for uneasiness." But in spite of all assurances, he showed himself desirous only to see the last of my gun and me. I dare say "villainous saltpetre," as the great playwright calls it, was never so cheap before nor since. For my shilling Master Pooke afforded me two great packages, over large to go into my pockets, as well as a mighty chunk of lead, which I bound upon Peggy's withers; and as if all this had not been enough, he presented me with a roll of comfits for my sister Annie, whose gentle face and pretty manners won the love of everybody. There was still some daylight here and there as I rose the hill above Porlock, wondering whether my mother would be in a fright or would not know it. The two great packages of powder, slung behind my back, knocked so hard against one another that I feared they must either spill or blow up, and hurry me over Peggy's ears from the woolen cloth I rode upon. For father always liked a horse to have some wool upon his loins whenever he went far from home, and had to stand about, where one pleased, hot and wet and panting. And father always said that saddles were meant for men full grown and heavy and losing their activity; and no boy or young man on our farm durst ever get into a saddle, because they all knew that the master would chuck them out pretty quickly. As for me, I had tried it once, from a kind of curiosity, and I could not walk for 2 or 3 days, the leather galled my knees so. But now, as Peggy bore me bravely, snorting every now and then into a cloud of air, for the night was growing frosty, presently the moon arose over the shoulder of a hill, and the pony and I were half glad to see her, and half afraid of the shadows she threw, and the images all around us. I was ready at any moment to shoot at anybody, having great faith in my blunderbuss, but hoping not to prove it. And as I passed the narrow place where the Doones had killed my father, such a fear broke out upon me that I leaned upon the neck of Peggy, and shut my eyes, and was cold all over. However, there was not a soul to be seen, until we came home to the old farmyard; and there was my mother crying sadly, and Betty Muxworthy scolding. "Come along now," I whispered to Annie, the moment supper was over; "and if you can hold your tongue, Annie, I will show you something." She lifted herself on the bench so quickly, and flushed so rich with pleasure, that I was obliged to stare hard away, and make Betty look beyond us. Betty thought I had something hid in the closet beyond the clock case, and she was the more convinced of it by reason of my denial. Not that Betty Muxworthy, or any one else for that matter, ever found me in a falsehood, because I never told one, not even to my mother, or, which is still a stronger thing, not even to my sweetheart, when I grew up to have one; but that Betty being wronged in the matter of marriage a generation or two agone, by a man who came hedging and ditching, had now no mercy, except to believe that men from cradle to grave are liars, and women fools to look at them. When Betty could find no crime of mine, she knocked me out of the way in a minute, as if I had been nobody, and then she began to coax Mistress Annie, as she always called her, and draw the soft hair down her hands, and whisper into the little ears. Meanwhile dear mother was falling asleep, having been troubled so much about me, and Watch, my father's pet dog, was nodding closer and closer up into her lap. "Now, Annie, will you come?" I said, for I wanted her to hold the ladle for melting of the lead. "Will you come at once, Annie, or must I go for Lizzie, and let her see the whole of it?" "Indeed, then, you won't do that," said Annie. "Lizzie to come before me, John? And she can't stir a pot of brewis, and scarce knows a tongue from a ham, John, and says it makes no difference, because both are good to eat. Oh, Betty, what do you think of that, to come of all her book learning?" "Thank God he can't say that of me," Betty answered shortly, for she never cared about argument, except on her own side. "Thank he, I says, every marnin' a'most, never to lead me astray so. Men is desavin', and so is gallanies; but the most desavin' of all is books, with their heads and tails, and the speckets in 'em, like a pig as have taken the measles. Some folk pretends to laugh and cry over them. God forgive them for liars." It was part of Betty's obstinacy that she never would believe in reading, or the possibility of it, but stoutly maintained to the very last that people first learned things by heart, and then pretended to make them out from patterns done upon paper, for the sake of astonishing honest folk just as do the conjurers. And even to see the parson and clerk was not enough to convince her. All she said was, "It made no odds, they were all the same as the rest of us." And now that she had been on the farm nigh upon 40 years, and had nursed my father, and made his clothes, and all that he had to eat, and then put him in his coffin, she was come to such authority that it was not worth the wages of the best man on the place to say a word in answer to Betty, even if he would face the risk to have 10 for 1, or 20. Annie was her love and joy. For Annie she would do anything, even so far as to try to smile, when the little maid laughed and danced to her. And in truth, I know not how it was, but every one was taken with Annie at the very first time of seeing her. She had such pretty ways and manners, and such a look of kindness, and a sweet soft light in her long blue eyes full of trustful gladness. Everybody who looked at her seemed to grow the better for it, because she knew no evil. And then the turn she had for cooking, you never would have expected it, and how it was her richest mirth to see that she had pleased you. I have been out on the world a vast deal, as you will own hereafter, and yet have I never seen Annie's equal for making a weary man comfortable. End of chapter 6. Recording by Michelle Harris.